From the shifting shadows of imagination to the blinding light of terror, this is One Tale to Midnight.
In the heart of the 17th century, where legends of cursed gold and ghostly ships haunted the high seas, there was one name that inspired fear and awe alike: Captain Elias Blackthorn. Known as the immortal scourge of the oceans, his youthful face and unchanging demeanor defied the passage of time, sparking whispers of dark pacts and forbidden powers. Yet the secret of his eternal life was neither a gift nor a blessing. It was a curse bound to a small obsidian statue carved in his likeness and buried beneath the ancient stones of Stonehenge. For centuries, Elias wielded the power of immortality, but it came at the price of haunting whispers and visions that clawed at his mind, urging him to return what he had stolen. This is the tale of a pirate who defied death, the cost of a power too great for any mortal to bear, and the path to redemption found not in plunder or conquest, but in guarding the world from a truth that could shatter it. The grey waves of Cornwall crashed relentlessly against the cliffs, their icy spray mixing with the howl of the wind. 12-year-old Elias Blackthorn huddled in the corner of the old fisherman's shack, his dark hair slicked against his pale face, eyes wide with the terror of betrayal. Outside, the angry shouts of the villagers grew closer, their pitchforks and torches painting jagged shadows across the cobblestone street. "Witch's child!" they shouted, the word a venomous curse. "Spawn of the storm!" Elias squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the noise, but it was no use. The air crackled with fury, and the men's boots pounded in rhythm with his heartbeat. He knew he had to run, but where? The sea would take him, and the villagers would show no mercy. His mother had been accused of witchcraft and hanged when he was a boy too young to understand. Now, the spectre of her fate loomed over him. A sudden crash of wood splintering jerked Elias from his thoughts. The door burst open, and faces twisted with fear and anger filled the entryway. Without thinking, Elias darted past them, weaving through the grasping arms and out into the storm-ridden night. The wind seemed to push him, guiding him toward the woods where the ancient oaks stood sentinel. Deeper and deeper he ran until the shouts faded and only the roar of the sea remained. The path twisted under his feet, slick with rain and roots, leading him farther into the blackness until a strange glow caught his eye. He stumbled to a halt, chest heaving, and stared in disbelief. A stone chapel, half devoured by time and ivy, stood before him. A single candle burned inside, casting a pale, flickering light. Elias swallowed hard, torn between the instinct to run and the inexplicable pull that urged him forward. He stepped inside, the air thick with the smell of earth and something older, something sacred. The light of the candle danced across the features of a man seated at the altar, shrouded in a tattered robe. His eyes, as pale as winter frost, locked onto Elias. "So, the storm brings you here," the man rasped, voice heavy with the weight of ages. "Elias Blackthorn, the one fated to steal what should never be taken." Elias opened his mouth, words tumbling over one another as he tried to speak. "How do you know my name?" The old man, Edric, the last of the druids, rose from his seat. He was impossibly tall, his movements like shadows gliding over stone. "I know more than your name, boy. I know your blood sings with a power you do not yet understand." Elias's eyes drifted to the altar, where an object sat, bathed in the candle's glow. It was a small statue, carved from obsidian, depicting a man with a sharp jawline and eyes that seemed alive even in stone. His own eyes, his own face. "Take it," Edric said, the flicker of a smile playing at the corner of his thin lips. "Claim what is yours, but remember, power comes at a cost you cannot yet fathom." The boy reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed the cold stone. A jolt like lightning coursed through him, and suddenly the world around him dissolved into blinding white. He felt himself being torn apart and rebuilt at once. A force older than time wrapping around his soul, and binding it tight. When the light faded, Elias was alone in the chapel. The candle had gone out, and the storm outside had ceased, as if held in awe. In his hand, the statue pulsed with a warmth that belied its stony surface. He felt different, alive in a way that defied description. The villagers' shouts were long gone, and the fear that had once gripped him was replaced by something new: power. But deep in the echoes of that silent chapel, a whisper lingered, a prophecy as old as the stones that guarded its secrets. The debt must be paid. The years that followed Elias's encounter with Edric and the statue were marked by swift and violent change. He left Cornwall behind, the village and its curses fading into the past like a bad dream. The boy grew into a man with the sea as his master and the unknown horizon as his only destination. By the age of 20, Elias Blackthorn had carved out a name for himself as a deckhand on merchant ships, known for his keen eye and unnerving intuition. But it wasn't long before life as a mere sailor felt like a prison. The power he felt that night in the chapel pulsed within him, restless and hungry. He craved more than the monotonous rhythms of a sailor's life. He wanted command, riches, and the freedom of the seas under his own terms. When Elias turned 24, a chance came in the form of a mutiny. The captain of the merchant vessel, the Starbound, was cruel and blind to the growing dissent among his men. Elias was neither. He whispered in the dark, sowing seeds of rebellion that flourished under the weight of the captain's lash. When the night came to strike, Elias's blade was the first to taste blood. The rebellion was swift, the crew quick to pledge loyalty to the man who orchestrated their freedom. "Long live Captain Blackthorn!" they cheered as the former captain's body tumbled into the cold, dark sea. The transformation was complete. No longer a boy running from curses, Elias was now Captain Blackthorn, feared and revered, his name spoken with a mix of awe and dread. He christened the ship the Crimson Tempest and painted its sails red to remind the world that blood was the price of freedom. The years that followed were filled with battles, treasures, and conquests that would cement Captain Blackthorn's name in the annals of piracy. The Crimson Tempest became a ghost ship in sailors' tales, appearing from the mist only to vanish just as quickly, leaving destruction in its wake. Blackthorn seemed to know when storms would strike, when enemy ships were most vulnerable, and where the richest plunder lay hidden. Some whispered that he was blessed by Poseidon, others claimed he had stolen knowledge from the gods. The truth was more sinister. The statue that had bound him still pulsed with power, a silent partner in his reign. It whispered in dreams, sending him visions of storms and victory, guiding his hand in battles that seemed impossible to win. Yet with each triumph, there was a cost. The nights grew long, haunted by echoes of screams, not of men, but of something deeper, more primal. Elias watched his crew age and die one by one, while he remained untouched. His face never grew lined, his hair never greyed. The men who once celebrated his cunning now eyed him with suspicion, stories of curses and sorcery curling through the air like smoke. Elias took no wife, sired no children, and kept his own counsel. The years turned into decades, and even the most loyal of his crew began to falter. When the whispers grew louder and the rumors of immortality reached fever pitch, challenges to his authority began to arise, but none were successful. The legend of Captain Blackthorn was unassailable, his blade as sharp as the day it first tasted blood, his mind sharper still. In the dark corners of taverns from Port Royal to Algiers, sailors would lower their voices to recount how the captain had once killed a man for merely asking why he did not age. Those who dared speak of curses in his presence never lived to spread their theories. Yet deep in his cabin, surrounded by maps and the spoils of 100 raids, Elias felt the gnawing emptiness that centuries of life had wrought. He traced the lines of the obsidian statue, its eyes now duller, less vibrant than before. It was as if the statue itself felt the weight of time. and with every passing year, the dreams of Stonehenge grew stronger, more insistent. On the eve of his 60th year at sea, Elias awoke with a start. The dream had been different this time, sharper. He saw Stonehenge bathed in moonlight, its great stones casting shadows that reached out like fingers. The whispers were no longer whispers but a chorus, repeating a single phrase that made his blood run cold. The debt must be paid. Elias rose and stared into the polished steel of his mirror. The same face, unchanged, the same sharp, dark eyes that had haunted the waters of the Caribbean. But now there was something else, a flicker of doubt. For the first time, he questioned if he could withstand eternity. The ocean, once his liberator, now felt like a cage, its waves pushing him ever closer to the edge of madness. The morning came, and with it a renewed sense of purpose. If the answer to his curse lay beneath the ancient stones of Stonehenge, then so be it. He would find it or die trying. The crew, now a mixture of men who had inherited their father's places and a few who claimed to have been there since the beginning, were too loyal or too afraid to question him. "Set course for England," he commanded, his voice as steady as it had been when he first claimed the Crimson Tempest. The wind picked up, as if eager to carry them home, and in the dark of his cabin the statue, unseen, glowed faintly, as if answering a call older than time. The days on the journey back to England were a blur of sea spray, rolling waves, and the rhythmic creak of the Crimson Tempest's timber bones. The crew worked in a tense silence, their eyes averted from the captain who neither ate nor slept. They had sailed with Captain Blackthorn long enough to sense when something more dangerous than a rival ship weighed on him. Elias stood at the prow, hands gripping the damp wood as the wind clawed at his coat. The horizon stretched endlessly, a blank canvas of roiling grey and whitecaps, but his mind was far from the sea. Every night the dreams came without fail, vivid and relentless. Stonehenge loomed in them, bathed in a cold silver light. Shadows moved between the monoliths, whispering voices that clawed at his sanity, chanting the same words over and over. The debt must be paid. The whispers wove through the dark like a living thing, a reminder that his time was slipping. Elias would wake in his cabin, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the statue's presence a heavy weight on the desk beside him. It felt alive, watching, waiting. One night, when sleep eluded him entirely, Elias poured himself a glass of rum and sat by the flickering lantern. The liquid burned his throat, but the fire it lit inside him was weak compared to the gnawing dread. He reached for the statue, turning it over in his hands, tracing the lines of his own face carved in stone. The eyes, once dull, now seemed to catch the light with an unnatural gleam. "Why now?" he whispered, voice raw with exhaustion. "Why after so many years?" A sudden noise, a soft knock at the cabin door, startled him. He set the statue down and glared at the entrance. Few dared disturb him, especially at this hour. "Enter," he said, masking the tremor in his voice. The door creaked open to reveal Thomas Gale, one of the few men aboard who had stood by Elias for more than a decade. The man's salt and pepper hair was tied back, his face lined with years of storms and battles. He stepped inside, glancing briefly at the statue before fixing his eyes on the captain. "Captain, the men are restless. They feel something is wrong." Elias met his gaze, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Do they now?" His voice held an edge that cut through the silence like a knife. Thomas sighed, stepping closer. "They don't speak it aloud, but I've seen it. The way they look at you when you're not watching, they whisper about the curse. Some say they hear voices in the night." The captain's eyes darkened, and for a moment a flicker of something passed between them. Fear? Recognition? Elias turned away, staring out the small window at the moonlit waves. "They are right to fear, Thomas," he said finally. but they know nothing of curses. Thomas took a step forward, the boards creaking under his boots. Then tell me, Captain, let me understand what it is we face. Elias hesitated, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He turned to his old friend, seeing the earnestness there, the loyalty. He had kept the secret locked away for too long. There is a power buried beneath Stonehenge, Elias began, his voice low and steady. A power older than kings and kingdoms. When I was just a boy, I claimed that power without knowing the cost. Thomas's eyes widened, and he glanced at the statue again, realization dawning. The statue? It's connected to it, isn't it? Elias nodded. It binds me, gives me life beyond measure, but it is not a gift, Thomas, it is a chain. And the voices, they are the guardians of that power, demanding its return. Silence hung between them, broken only by the distant call of a seabird. Thomas's face paled, but he squared his shoulders. Then why go back, Captain? Why risk everything to confront it now? Elias's eyes hardened, and he turned back to the sea. Because eternity is a prison, Thomas, and I would rather face the wrath of gods than another century of this hollow existence. Thomas nodded, the weight of the revelation settling into the lines of his weathered face. Without another word, he stepped back into the shadows and closed the door behind him. The captain listened to his footsteps fade, and the whispers in his mind grew louder, a chorus welcoming his decision. That night, Elias did not sleep. He did not dare. The journey continued, the wind seeming to hasten their path as if the sea itself sensed the urgency. But the closer they came to England, the more restless the nights grew. The whispers became louder, more distinct. The spirits of the past seemed to swirl around him, whispering names, faces, each a reminder of the debt he owed. One night, as the moon hung heavy and full, Elias dreamt not of Stonehenge but of the sea. It was calm, deceptively so, and the statue was in his hands, pulsing with an unnatural heat. Suddenly, the waters shifted, and a great shadow rose from the deep, eyes like coals staring into his very soul. The debt must be paid, it roared, and the dream shattered like glass. Elias bolted upright, gasping for breath. The lantern had burned low, casting long, flickering shadows. He glanced at the statue. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and for a moment he could swear he saw them blink. The coast of England appeared like a ghost on the horizon, shrouded in a pale mist that seemed to sigh with memories older than time. The crimson tempest sailed into a hidden cove, its blood-red sails now ragged with the wear of a relentless voyage. Captain Blackthorn stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the shoreline, the whispers in his mind growing louder as they neared the destination. The cold wind bit at his face, but he welcomed it. It felt more alive than the past 100 years combined. The crew disembarked cautiously, glancing nervously at the towering trees that bordered the rocky shore. The forest loomed dark and foreboding, as if holding secrets that wished to remain buried. Elias turned to Thomas Gale, who stood by his side, silent and steadfast. "Thomas, we make for Oxford," Elias said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "There's a scholar there who holds the knowledge we need." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, whispers of witchcraft and old magic passing between them, but they knew better than to question their captain. Thomas nodded, signalling for a few trusted men to follow. The journey inland was grueling, the muddy paths and biting winds slowing their progress. After 2 days they reached a sprawling estate nestled in the countryside, home to Lady Miriam Fairfax, a scholar of ancient rites and arcane texts. Rumours painted her as a reclusive figure, one whose family lineage traced back to the earliest days of the Druids. Elias had met her once before, many years ago, and he knew she would recognize the urgency in his return. Thomas knocked on the heavy oak door, and a young servant opened it, eyes wide at the sight of the rough-looking sailors standing before him. Elias pushed past without waiting for an invitation. "Where is Lady Fairfax?" he demanded. Before the servant could stutter out a response, a voice echoed from the library at the end of the hall. "There's no need for theatrics, Captain Blackthorn," said a woman draped in a long emerald-green robe. Her hair, silvered with age, framed a face lined with both wisdom and weariness. Lady Miriam's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, settled on Elias, taking in the years that hadn't touched him. "You've come for answers," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with secrets on a daily basis. "But I fear you won't like what you find." Elias's jaw clenched. "I need to know how to end this," he said, placing the statue on the polished wooden table between them. The room seemed to darken as the obsidian figure met Miriam's gaze. She inhaled sharply. "So it is true," she whispered. The statue of Blackthorn, carved by the last of the druids to anchor the spirit of immortality. Her eyes flickered with something between fascination and dread. "You've kept it hidden all this time?" Elias nodded. "But it speaks to me now. The whispers are relentless. Stonehenge calls, and I need to know why." Miriam paced the room, her fingers trailing over dusty tomes and scrolls. "The whispers you hear are the spirits of those who once guarded the stones. Stonehenge was never just a monument. It was a gate, a tether to the ancient powers of the earth. By claiming that statue, you stole a fragment of that power." Thomas, standing at the threshold, shifted uneasily. "And what happens if he returns it?" he asked, breaking the silence. Miriam's eyes darkened. "If he returns it willingly, the power will dissipate and the curse will be lifted, but the guardians will demand their due. They will test you, Captain, and if you falter, your fate will be worse than death." Elias felt a chill race down his spine. The promise of release was almost within reach, yet the price was steep. He had spent centuries wielding a power stolen from the bones of the world, and now it was time to face the consequences. Miriam laid out a map, its corners weighted with brass candlesticks. "Stonehenge must be approached by moonlight when the spirits are strongest. You'll need to dig beneath the stones, where the Guardian's power is most potent." Elias studied the map, noting the intricate runes that marked the outer circle. "And once I am there," Miriam's gaze was solemn, "once you place the statue back into the earth, you must recite the binding words. They are in Old English, and only by speaking them will the gate close, sealing the power away." Thomas stepped forward, his hand on Elias's shoulder. "We've stood beside you through battles and storms, Captain. If this is the end, we face it together." A flicker of gratitude crossed Elias's face, quickly replaced by determination. "So be it," he said, turning to Miriam. "Prepare what we need. We leave at sunset." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, the group set out, their lanterns casting trembling lights against the gathering dark. The road to Stonehenge was silent, the air thick with a premonition that seemed to weigh down their steps. Elias felt the whispers intensify with each mile, the voice of the statue now a roar in his mind. The debt must be paid. When the ancient stones finally came into view, standing tall and defiant against the night sky, a shiver ran through the group. Stonehenge loomed, its shadow long and deep, as if the earth itself held its breath for what was to come. Elias stepped forward, statue in hand, the moonlight casting his face in sharp relief. Behind him, Thomas and Miriam stood silent, watching, their own breaths caught in their throats. The time had come. The wind howled across Salisbury Plain, carrying with it an unnatural chill that seeped into bone and marrow. Stonehenge, bathed in the silvery glow of the full moon, loomed ahead like a colossus. The stones stood tall and indifferent, guardians that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. To Elias, they felt alive, watching, waiting. The group approached cautiously, their lanterns casting long, wavering shadows. Thomas Gale walked at Elias's side, his face set in grim determination, while Lady Miriam kept to the rear, her eyes darting over the ancient site as if half expecting the spirits to manifest at any moment. The whispers in Elias's mind had transformed from an indistinct murmur into a cacophony of voices. They surged with a desperation that made his heart pound, the urgency of their chant almost deafening. The debt must be paid. Here, Miriam said, breaking the silence. She pointed to a spot at the center of the stone circle, marked by a patch of dark earth. This is where you must place it. Elias nodded, the weight of the statue in his hands feeling heavier than ever. He stepped forward, each footfall resonating in the still night, until he stood at the heart of Stonehenge.
Before Elias could kneel, a sudden gust of wind roared through the circle, extinguishing their lanterns and plunging them into darkness. The moonlight seemed to pale, casting everything in a ghostly glow. Thomas drew his sword instinctively, eyes wide as he scanned the shadows. "Steady," Elias said, though his voice wavered. He knelt, the statue clutched tightly in his hands, and began to dig into the cold, unyielding earth. Each handful of dirt brought the voices closer, their whispers curling around him like smoke. Miriam's voice trembled as she recited an incantation under her breath, her fingers tracing runes in the air. The ground beneath them shuddered, a deep, resonant vibration that spoke of power, long dormant. Elias placed the statue into the shallow pit, its eyes catching the moonlight with an eerie gleam. He took a deep breath, the ancient words Miriam had taught him echoing in his mind. But before he could speak, a sound like thunder rolled across the plain. From between the stones, figures began to emerge, pale, translucent shapes, their faces gaunt and hollow-eyed. They were draped in robes that shimmered like liquid moonlight, their presence cold and suffocating. The guardians of Stonehenge had awakened. The largest of the spirits, taller than the rest and crowned with a circlet of vines and bones, stepped forward, its eyes locked onto Elias, glowing with an unearthly light. "You who have stolen the gift of life," the spirit spoke, its voice like the rumble of distant thunder. "Do you now come to return what you have taken?" Elias swallowed hard, his heart hammering in his chest. "I come to make amends," he said, his voice firm despite the terror coursing through him. "To end this curse." The spirit's gaze darkened, and the other guardians began to chant, their voices rising in a mournful, harmonious dirge that filled the night. "The debt must be paid." The spirit raised a translucent hand, and suddenly the whispers in Elias's mind twisted into screams. Memories flooded him, faces of the men he had killed, ships he had sunk, lives he had ruined in pursuit of power and immortality. Each image seared into his consciousness, a burden that pressed down like the weight of the sea itself. Elias fell to his knees, gasping for breath. The voices were louder now, accusing, relentless. Thomas took a step forward, eyes wild with desperation. "Captain, speak the words!" he shouted over the din. Miriam's eyes were wide with horror. "Do it now, Elias, or we are all lost." With every ounce of will he possessed, Elias forced the screams to the back of his mind and took a shaky breath. The Old English words tumbled from his lips, each one feeling like it tore a piece of his soul as it left him. "I see forguiled I thyet ways genuine, leitan this riest erdian. I return what was taken, let this place rest." The ground beneath him trembled violently, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. The chanting of the guardians grew louder, almost deafening before stopping abruptly. Silence fell, thick and absolute. The leading spirit's eyes met Elias's, a flicker of something, approval, relief, passing over its spectral face. "The debt is paid," it said, and then, with a sound like a sigh, it and the others dissolved into mist. The cold dissipated, and the moonlight grew warm again, bathing the stones in a serene glow. The statue, now lifeless, lay buried in the earth, its power returned to the land it had been stolen from. Elias staggered to his feet, his body trembling with exhaustion. The voices were gone, replaced by a silence that felt strange, almost foreign. He turned to Thomas and Miriam, who watched him with expressions of awe and disbelief. "It is done," Elias whispered, a small, weary smile forming on his lips. For the first time in centuries, he felt free. But in that moment, he also felt something else, a sudden, deep fatigue, as if the years he had evaded had finally caught up to him all at once. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson.
The morning sun broke over Stonehenge, gilding the ancient stones with light that seemed almost holy. The stillness was profound, as if the entire plain held its breath in the wake of what had transpired. Elias Blackthorn lay unconscious at the center of the circle, his chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. Thomas Gale knelt beside him, fingers hovering uncertainly over the captain's pallid face. "Is he?" Thomas's voice cracked with the weight of a question he dared not finish. "No!" Lady Miriam said, stepping forward, her robe sweeping over the dewy grass. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned Elias's face. "He's alive. The power has left him, but the body takes time to remember mortality." Miriam's voice was tinged with both relief and apprehension. She had spent her life studying the secrets of the ancient world, but never had she imagined witnessing the return of such power firsthand. She glanced at the buried spot where the statue now rested beneath layers of earth. The sight seemed peaceful, but she knew that peace was fragile. "Help me get him up," Thomas said, his hands now firm as he lifted Elias's limp form. The captain's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed. He groaned, the sound low and guttural, as if his body were protesting against a sudden and foreign weakness. "Where?" Elias's voice was barely a whisper, and he winced as his vision cleared to reveal the towering stones around him. "It's done, Captain," Thomas said, a rare smile breaking across his face. "The Guardians are gone. The debt is paid." The cost of mortality. Elias sat up slowly, every joint in his body protesting. He felt different, not just exhausted, but aged, as though the centuries of life he had stolen had finally exacted their toll. The once sharp edge of immortality had dulled, replaced by an ache that settled deep into his bones. He rubbed his temples, the whispers that had plagued him for so long now eerily absent. "It feels quiet," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Miriam nodded, watching him with a mix of curiosity and concern. "The power is returned, Elias. You are no longer bound by it. But understand this. What was done here tonight has consequences." Elias met her eyes, the weight of her words sinking in. "What do you mean?" Miriam glanced at the stones, their shadows stretching long as the sun rose higher. "Stonehenge was more than just a gateway. By returning what you took, you've awakened the balance. Power shifts, and others will feel it. The Guardians are appeased, but the world, it has changed." Thomas's brow furrowed. "Are we in danger, Lady Fairfax?" Miriam hesitated, her gaze shifting between the two men. "Not immediate danger, no. But there are those who have long sought what Elias once possessed. They will sense its release, and they will come." Elias's lips pressed into a thin line. The idea of peace was fleeting, already slipping through his grasp. He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the protest of his body. "Then we prepare.